Uh, there we go. So again, thank you all for being here. Hopefully this will be something for you to learn. As I might have said the last time, apparently I'm not ready to be done teaching yet, even though I'm retired. So this was a cheap way to do it for me. Uh, Easy way and fun way. So hopefully what this will do, we just to give the people outside the our survey group, we have been surveying butterflies at Guadalupe River State Park. We attempt to do two surveys per month. We've been doing them since around 2012. We got really consistent by 2015 and on. Not only do we survey the butterflies at the park twice a month, if the weather and timing and everything else cooperates, we also record all flowering plants each time. Um, and two volunteers help keep track of those on spreadsheets. And we're hoping here in the next couple of months we're going to be able to kind of summarize 10 years worth of data that we've finally reached. So we're real happy about that, and we're continuing to do that. One of the things that if you have a chapter and you're thinking about doing a survey, the good thing is think long term. There was recently a report called State of the Butterflies that came out. The Xerxes Society was a major player in that, and about in the last from the last 20 years, I think up through 2020, the estimate is that about 22 to 25% of butterfly numbers have gone down. Um, Overall population has gone down about that much. So while a few butterflies are doing better, a lot of butterflies are declining. And so these long-term surveys, especially of an insect that's relatively easy to identify versus say bees, all the different kinds of bees that we have. This gives us some kind of an idea of what's going on. And of course, Guadalupe's gone through a lot of changes over the years. There used to be a lot of cedar thickets, and they cleared those out and burned. Now they burn regularly, and that certainly has changed the look of the landscape that where we do the surveys at the park. And of course, also if you are in the area and you want to join us, you can email me or Darlene. Um, and I'll make sure you get those uh, email addresses, and we can put you on the list and send you all the information. And I'll update you with what's coming up at the end of the presentation. So last month in January we focused on swallowtails. This month we're going to focus on whites and sulphurs, the purity. But before we get to the purity, I felt like there were a couple of things I left on the table last month that I wanted to re-hit, and then we'll do a little quick quiz um, of a few images just to see if you remember what you were looking at or what I talked about last month. So, but I want to begin with this butterfly right here, which all of you know, or a lot of you may know, is the giant swallowtail. What some of you may not know is that some time ago, this giant swallowtail was split into the eastern and western giant swallowtails based on genetics, some genetic work that's being done with a lot of butterflies, by the way. So that we're seeing a lot of speciation basically based on those results. So a lot of I would say all of our field guides at this point are out of date as things continue to move forward. But this is a giant swallowtail. The tricky part for us in Texas, unless you're in the valley or you're in far west Texas or far east Texas, um, trying to get to the right species is really challenging. Along the I-35 corridor, the two species seem to overlap. As a result, you get characteristics from both species, the way they've been split. So in our area, for example, we have to be content most of the time to put down just giant swallowtail, basically. But what I wanted to do is to show you these two pictures. This butterfly landed in our yard this fall. Actually, was drinking from our hummingbird feeder, which I had not ever witnessed before with one of these guys. So it's kind of cool. But I wanted to go through the comparison of the different, I think there's seven different characteristics that are used to try to speciate the giant swallowtail. So just to remind you, this is from the publication that split the two species. And what you're seeing here are the two species. On the left is Rumico, that is the western giant, and the eastern giant is Crespontes. Crespontes has always been the name before they split it. You'll notice that there are, in fact, seven characteristics, seven arrows pointing to different parts of the body. Um, and let me see if that thing is hide video. Well, I don't know what I just did. I just did something. That was not smart. Uh, Hang on. Oh gosh. Okay, there we go. Okay, hopefully you can see all of this image. I've got this funny little thing up here. Seems to be blocking my view anyway. Anyway, so what I want to do is go through each one of these and show you how difficult this really is with this butterfly. So to begin with, if we start with characteristic um, number one right here, if you'll look up here, they talk about the size of the black spot in that cell, that yellow cell. And in the eastern, it's generally supposed to be smaller. In the western, it's supposed to be large. You can see that in this one, it's kind of large. So if we were going to grade it, I would call it a Rumico, a western, with that first characteristic. And remember, just like with birds and a lot of other organisms, one thing a lot of times doesn't necessarily, one characteristic doesn't always tell you exactly what it is. So the suite of those characters helps with nailed down identification on lots and lots of things, from plants to birds to butterflies. So that's the first one. The second one is the amount of yellow on the little where it indents along the edge of the forewing. On the eastern, you can see there's yellow right here. You may have to look pretty close. Yellow here, kind of in the valleys between those little raised edges. On the western, it's almost absent. There's a little bit, but not much. If you look at this one, we can barely see a little bit of yellow here, here, and here. Can't really see it on this the left wing, so we really can't tell. So again, I would call that a Rumico. That'd be a good Rumico characteristic. The third thing that we're going to look at is this row of spots right here. If you compare the eastern, they have three really large spots. This one especially is large, and then it kind of continues up as a secondary row underneath the big broad yellow stripe patches. On the western, the spots are generally smaller and kind of peter out, so there's nothing up here. So we've got these three spots here. We've got one there. We don't see anything else that goes beyond it. But these are of the size that I would consider these to be more leaning towards Crespontes. So for this one, I would say it's a toss-up of the characteristic. Fourth characteristic may be the most important, the most important of two of the seven important ones. And that is these yellow stripes on the thorax from behind the eye going down the thorax. On the western, it's said that this may be the best characteristic to identifying a western, in that they have two distinct yellow lines. You can clearly see on this particular butterfly, and you see that here on the Rumico, and you see there might be a spot or two, but there's certainly not a continuous line of yellow on either side of the thorax. So for that characteristic, if I had to base this identification just on that, I would call that a Rumico. Then we go to number 5, and that's the abdomen, the amount of black in the abdomen. And you can see this is kind of a bad specimen. So I would call this a toss-up. There's supposed to be less black down the center of the abdomen. This one generally has more black, but over here, this is kind of in between. So again, this is kind of a toss-up characteristic. And then number 6 is another one that actually could be really helpful as well. This is probably the second most important one, but it's only valuable if you get a picture of the underwing. And remember, with this butterfly, when it's nectaring, a lot of the times it's constant movement. So getting a good slow picture like that is hard to do. But if you'll notice that on Rumico, you could draw a straight line on the inside edge of this mesh of color and pattern right here. Whereas on the Crespontes, there seems to be one line here and then a line here. So there's a little break right there where that number 6 is. And on this one, this is pretty distinctly a straight line. So I would call that a Rumiko on that characteristic. And then finally, one that's even trickier is the tail. Rumiko's tail is supposed to be a little more slender and thin. The Crespontes is supposed to be wider and more of a like a big spoon of some kind. And on this one, it almost looks like this pretty closely. But then when you take a look at a different angle, this one looks more slender, more like this. So again, this is probably a toss up. So the bottom line is this is a giant swallowtail, and you have to be comfortable with that. Sometimes the answer is we don't know for sure. But I wanted to show you that those overlap zones that make it in our area along the I-35 corridor really, really challenging to identify as which species. So just keep that in mind if you're doing surveys in the hill country along the Austin area, up in this area, you're going to have this zone of overlap that you just can't avoid. All right, so that's the giant swallowtail. The other point that I think I failed to mention very well last week was on the giant versus the two-tailed. I got carried away on something else. Imagine that. So a couple of characteristics I wanted to reinforce is that when you look at the wings, the closed wings of the tiger swallowtail, eastern tiger over here, and the two-tailed here, there's a couple of really significant differences if you can get the wings to stop moving. Again, a lot of fluttering going on, so sometimes it's hard to tell. Obviously, the two-tailed has two sets of wing tails. This one only has one. Um, but the characteristics I want you to watch for is this row of yellow right here versus this yellow row of yellow right here. On the eastern tiger, they're little faint spots. They're not very well defined. On every two-tailed I ever see, they have a very distinct, almost yellow brick-like pattern that goes along the underside of the forewing. The other characteristic that's pretty noticeable on this, and I'm showing you these because sometimes the tails get broke off as these butterflies go through their life, and then that doesn't help with the ID. You'll notice that these are very distinct brick, almost rectangular yellow spots along the edge on the underside of the hind wing, whereas on the swallowtail, the tiger swallowtail, it's more orangey right here and more kind of comma shaped, a little bit less squared off, if you will. So those are two really good characteristics to help with the tiger swallowtail. Now here's our quiz. I mentioned the first training. I'm going to give you a little refresher quiz each time. So I'm going to show you a photograph. Um, Robert, if you're there, can you monitor if people can just write in the comments or whatever that's called on that thing,
Yeah, I will.
um, what they say the answer is. So here's the first one. There's I think four pictures. What is that species of swallowtail? And Robert, you can just tell me. I can't see the answers. So
All right. I think you've stumped the audience. Oh, two-tailed. We have a two-tailed. Um, Eastern.
anybody? Okay. Any others? Any others? We'll give them another 10 seconds.
Another Eastern. And it looks like Eastern's taking the lead.
Yep, it is in fact an eastern tiger swallowtail. Again, even on the top side of this, and it's kind of not fair, right? But again, the butterflies don't always cooperate. But that row of yellow dots here on the outside edge of the forewing, even on the underside, it looks like this as it does on the top side. So that would help you. Also, that here's the main tail, and on this one you can see a second tail right here, but it's very stubby. That's another characteristic. So this is an eastern tiger swallowtail. Good on you that got it. Again, this is why we do this because you just got to keep practicing um, to get it right. All right, what's this one?
Pipevine. 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 I think Pipevine's going
There
to take
you
the
go.
lead.
Pipevine's going to win the day. So the
Yep.
pipevine has that orange comma or C, if you will, of orange spots, and that really helps tell you that this is the pipevine for sure. Okay, very good. And by the way, one of its favorite flowers at the Cibolo Nature Center is this guy right here, skeleton plant. They just go nuts on this flower, just crap lining it whenever they're blooming. All right, so pipevine. Here's the next one. Oh, this should be pretty easy because it's the same photograph that I just showed you.
Two-tailed.
Yeah, two-tailed for sure. So
Two-tailed.
again, there's those patterns I showed. Now, in terms of the tails, here are the two long tails. Here's the second long tail, and here's the other long tail. So again, you can see those aren't nearly as stubby as the one in the previous picture. So yes, two-tailed. And then finally, this guy right here, I believe I'm correct to say guy. Yeah, this is male.
Let's see. Eastern?
Eastern tiger or Eastern
Oh,
black?
hold on, just say black swallowtail, giant swallowtail, giant swallowtail, eastern giant.
Okay, so this is actually the black swallowtail. And I'm going to go back a couple of slides, backtrack a little bit, but the black swallowtail is black on the top and it's black on the bottom. It has this circle of orange spots that go around here on the hind wing. And then it has this distinct row, actually two rows, but this really bright row of yellow spots. Let's go back to the giant because I can show you a characteristic there and then we'll flash forward and get started on the others. Let's see, giant. Okay. So if you look at the giant swallowtail, on the underside, it's predominantly yellow. On the top side, it's predominantly black. And it does have that row of yellow spots, just like the black swallowtail. But notice this, I'll call it the shoulder, a whole row of additional, whoops, an additional row of yellow dots that if we go forward, so look at those two. If we go forward to this guy, this row is down here lower on the wing. There's not something going across the shoulder, if you will, or the upper forewing. So again, black, black, and then not another row of black right here or yellow spots right through here. So this is definitely the black swallowtail. Okay, just means you got to keep working at it. There are no grades, and nobody's going to kick you out of our surveys. All right, so let's talk about the whites and sulfurs tonight, as we are starting out to do. First of all, they're among our most abundant and noticeable butterflies because they're yellow and they're bright, and there's so many of them oftentimes, or they're bright white. The white caterpillars feed on mustards, the whites that we're going to show you. The sulfur caterpillars feed generally on legumes, members of the Leguminosae family. They are characterized by those bright colors, usually yellow or white, obviously. Males and females are distinguishable in many species, with females of most sulfurs having a pale or whitish form. I'll show you a couple of examples of that tonight. Several experience seasonal peaks in abundance, particularly spring and fall. Many species are migratory in summer and fall. A lot of our ones that are more southern can be very migratory in the late summertime. And we'll talk about that. I made a mistake. I forgot to get my water bottle. Barry, if you can hear me, can you help me out with some water? Um, so we're going to be talking about that. And the reason too, by the way, the seasonal peaks happen in spring and fall. Most of the crucifera family bloom in the spring. If you get rain, sorry, thank you for that. Forgot about that. Sorry, I guess I don't talk enough anymore. If you get that rain in the fall, a few of the cruciferas make a return, but they're largely spring flowering. And then when you talk about legumes, a lot of the early legumes are important for some of the sulfurs, and then later in the season, other legumes come along. So legumes are spread out over a longer period of time. That's the fact that you have more sulfurs throughout the summer. They puddle, especially the sulfurs. I've seen puddles, and this is where there's a little bit of water, standing water in mud. I've literally seen hundreds and hundreds of sulfurs dipping their proboscis in the mud or in the water to get nutrients and to drink. And then sulfurs overwinter as caterpillars, while whites overwinter in the chrysalis stage. All right, so let's talk about two different whites that we have, and if you're from not around this immediate area, there are other whites out there, but these are the two that we have in our survey area. So these are the two that we watch for the most part. The first one is one of my favorite little tiny butterflies. It's called a falcate orange tip. The male has this orange tip on the surface of top of the wings. The female doesn't, but the falcate part of it comes from the tip of the forewing, which you can see better on this female over to the right, has that little sharp point right there, and that helps you identify this. This is the butterfly. It feeds on rock cress, other mustards. Um, it is a small butterfly, weak flight, very distinguishable because of that. When it folds its wings, you'll notice that it has this beautiful pattern on the underside of the hind wing. And when it folds that up over the underside of the forewing, it becomes, especially if it's sitting on a branch near moss or small moss or lichens, it becomes invisible. It's incredible camouflage. Um, Also, you'll notice that on the forewing, each of them, both male and female, have a black dot about midway towards the front of the wing. There, the female seems to be a little bit bigger than the males generally. In terms of at Guadalupe River State Park, where we survey, they're fairly limited because rock cress is fairly limited in the park in terms of its distribution. It's a weak little plant, um, and I photographed them laying eggs on it. The females, I photographed the eggs. I photographed the larvae. There are some years when it's really dry down there. I can't find any rock cress. So this is the day use area. Near the day use area, this is the trail that goes out to the overlook here. The Discovery Center is right down here. And so this little stretch of woods right here is typically where we get them. This may have been not a, this is not a survey site, so this might have been another random photograph for the user. This is all iNaturalist data, by the way, just so you know that. So they're very restricted in our park, but they have a wide distribution. You can find them in the valley, the lower Rio Grande Valley. You can find them over much of Texas, eastern half of Texas. But they're very small and they only appear at the first of the year. Ah. The adults emerge from the chrysalis in March, early March, and that date fluctuates with the weather. And then by the end of our last record is April 27th. So one generation, once they are done laying eggs, they disappear and you don't see them again until the next spring. So this is one that it's always special to see one of these guys because they're so uncommon and hard to find. So this is always a prize for us come March to track one of these or a couple of these down. The other white that is much more common than the falcate orange tip is the checkered white, and checkered white is again another example of the male and female being different. You notice the female here has a lot more black spots on the upper side of the wings. The male has far fewer. There is it has about a 2.5 inch wingspan. Um, it is a butterfly that we see primarily in the spring, maybe in the in the summer, but very little in the summer, and then a little bit of a resurgence in the fall. But primarily, we want to look for it mostly in the springtime. Um, it's kind of an interesting butterfly in that it has something called a short day form. And this could be in the spring or the fall. And basically, what it is a special phase, if you will, of a butterfly that has fewer markings on the upper side of the wings, of these black wings markings based on the um, length of the night that the larvae experience. So it's a really odd thing. So all that's telling you is there's a lot of variation to the wing patterns of this butterfly. The other thing that varies a lot is the underside here. One of these butterflies is fresh, it can be beautifully gold. Looks like it's flecked in gold, this pattern here. And then other times you don't see that at all. So again, that's part of that variation that happens with this particular species. Um, we never. This is certainly more common than the falcate orange tip, but certainly not as common as a lot of the sulfurs that are at the park. But the nice thing about this is it's well distributed at the park. So a lot of these records from here and down in here are us during our surveys. Here's some other survey data. Here's the Bower unit over here. So again, pretty wide distribution throughout the park. So one we would expect to see and do see, especially in the springtime. Again, female, lots of black spotting pattern. Male, a lot fewer here. There is the cabbage white, which is almost all white. But the cabbage white doesn't extend this far south in Texas, and it's very, very limited even in North Texas. So I'm not even worried about the cabbage white. It's not one that you should have to worry about on your list. Now let's talk about all the sulfurs. So there's a bunch of them, and we're going to go in size from the top left to the from smallest with the dainty sulfur all the way around the top. The orange sulfur, kind of medium sized, if you will, within the scope of all of these species, all the way up to the cloudless sulfur and the large orange, which are both the largest of the two that we of the two big ones that we have here in our area. So I want to cover each one of these. Um, but you can see there you're going to see a lot of variation. A lot of times, some of them have winter forms and summer forms. And that is for heating up, for storing the warmth from the sun. There are some species. Let's see if all of them, not all of them, have significant differences between the males and the females. So we will start with the smallest one, the dainty sulfur. It has a wingspan of 1.25 inches, so not very long. It does have a distinct summer and winter form. So this is the summer form right here where it's got a lot of pale yellow in here. This is the winter form where you see all the blackish, brownish, grayish scales. And here's winter form here. And in the wintertime, oftentimes this is how we see them. They'll be on the ground and they'll be leaning so that the sun is hitting them directly to help warm them up. So that is thought to absorb heat and allow them to warm up so they can continue to move. One of the famous characteristics of this tiny little butterfly is this slice of cheese right here. There's an orange slice that you see right here. You've got a black spot here, a black spot here. And actually, there's a couple here. One of them's hidden right here. But that little slice of deep orange, yellowish orange can help you identify this when it's resting. But it is very tiny, so a very small butterfly. When it's in flight, this is what you can notice. There's a black tip on each forewing, and then there's a black line going through the middle of the fore or the back of the forewing as well. So there's a lot more black in this butterfly than you see when the wings are folded. And most of the time, when the butterfly is resting, the wings are in fact folded. So you're not going to see that inside of that wing unless it's flying. Um, it has a very weak flight, so it's usually very close to the ground. It's feeding typically on fairly small flowers. In the springtime, it likes to hit things like Dutchman's breeches. It hits frog fruit, um, and things. Straggler daisy would be another one that they are going to feed on, and they are located throughout the park. I think I have Let's see here. There we go. There's a map. Again, you can see the distribution is throughout the entire park. We find them just about everywhere. This is one we typically find more of them during the late fall into winter. Then they kind of disappear in the summertime and then they start reappearing in the fall. Um, so they're even though they are year round, I think we've got recorded them in all 12 months of the year. They're going to be much more abundant late in the fall into the early winter. And oftentimes, in fact, we just did a survey a week or so ago, right after all that cold weather. And this, I believe, is one of the two species that we got on our survey. We do survey 12 months a year, by the way, which is still, as a northerner, hard to believe. Anyway, getting back to reality, here's the next one. The next size up is the little yellow. Again, a summer form right here and a winter form right here. Notice there's more black flecking in here, more spot patterns. So they can be quite variable right here between the two of them. They're again a little bit bigger. They get up to 1.75, not that inches, not that you're going to be able to easily tell that when they're out. They have a slightly stronger flight than the dainty, and so they fly a little bit higher off the ground, not very high. They're typically maybe 1 to 2 feet. Um, and they are not as good about setting down as the dainty is. So sometimes you have to follow them for quite a ways to see them. You'll notice that right here, there's a brown spot. This one's a little more black with flecking right here. The other thing that really helps you identify this, and I'm going to show you another species that's very similar, but mostly in the Rio Grande Valley, but occasionally, on rare occasion, it's shown up in the park and in the hill country. But the two black spots right here at the base of the hind, here's the hind wing coming down. Here's the two black spots. Those two black spots will verify that this is in fact a little yellow. So when in doubt, look for those two little spots. The other butterfly that looks a lot like it, right, is right here, the mimosa yellow. Notice it too has a brown spot, just like it has right here. It has a few spots scattered around here. But when you start to look at the base of the hind wing, you can almost not see any black spot. There's a hint, but this one is not very distinct. From through a pair of binoculars, you can clearly see the difference between this one and this one. The mimosa tends to also be a little paler yellow. Again, very, very uncommon here around us compared to the little yellow. If you could see on the inside of the wings, the tip of the forewings has got less black on the mimosa versus the black on the inside of the tip of the forewings of the little yellow. So hopefully that'll help. 99.8% of the butterflies that look like a little yellow are in fact a little yellow when we're surveying at Guadalupe River State Park, just so that you know. There's that significance of the two noticeably black dots that help with the ID. And by the way, around here, the time you would look for the mimosa is probably in the late fall. Seems like in the fall we get a little, depending on the year, but it always seems like there's a little bit of movement north of a lot of these sulfurs, and that includes the mimosa. The next species we're going to look at is incredibly variable in terms of its appearance. This is sleepy orange. Our wingspan is now inched up to a little bit over 2 inches from wingtip to wingtip. This one is a very deep orange butterfly on the inside of the wings, on the dorsal surface. But again, when it lands, it folds its wings, so it can be very difficult to see. You get used to watching for that as it's flying around, and it's a stronger flyer than the previous two species. But you want to watch on them with the pattern, that deep orange, as it's flying around. You'll be able to start to learn that. And that's just a skill you pick up over time, just like with birds or anything else, especially flying critters. Its host plant are sennas and partridge pea. We have patches of senna up here. We've got scattered patches of senna down here, and that's where we typically find the butterflies um, of this species. If we have a patch of Lindheimer Center, for example, we wait long enough, we're going to see at least a couple of these guys flying around. But you can notice that the variation in the pattern, this is more of a winter pattern here. Here's a spring, and this is when the prickly pears are blooming. This has got a much more yellow appearance. This is an extreme version of a sleepy orange that I photographed recently. I think this is more out in West Texas, but I wanted to include it here just to show you the amount of variation. And this backlit image here, which kind of helps a little bit because you can see how much black is on the dorsal surface of the wing on both wings, forewings and hind wings. They call it a sleepy orange because right here is supposed to be the closed eyes of a woman sleeping. And I can kind of see that, but it's still a little bit of a mystery to me for whatever reason. This is another butterfly that we'll see year round. You'll notice it also has a wide distribution in the park, again, related to where the centers are. I know this is a lot of information. The next species we're going to get up to the Lyside sulfur. The lyside is an interesting butterfly. This is a butterfly that its host plant is guaiacon. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation of that, lignum vitae. Um, it does not grow around here, right, in this immediate area, Bernie, Spring Branch. I've never seen it growing in the wild. As a result of that, this butterfly makes its appearance by being an immigrant or immigrating or emigrating into our area from the south and the west. It is probably our least marked of the sulfurs. I know, in fact, it is our least marked of the sulfurs. And it varies from a real pale yellowish, almost greenish cast to this pale yellow to a combination of pale green and yellow, and then again, yellow green here. And with almost no markings, the distinguishing marks that are there that are worth watching for or this vein that shoots through here. When they land, a lot of times their wings again are closed. That's typical of the sulfurs. But you notice this big, thick vein that runs right through the almost center of the hind wing, and this little black spot that's often here. You can see it in this photograph. You can see it in this photograph. You can see it in this photograph. You can't see it in this photograph. So again, variability. The other thing that you'll often see is that especially the farther west you go, they'll have this little thumbprint like thing, black mark right here. It's more common to the west. This was taken at Cibolo Nature Center in Bernie, and instead of having the black mark up here, it was actually clear down here. So that's kind of weird and different. But a lot of times, again, you don't see that mark with the butterflies around here. So this is a butterfly that's going to come into our area in the spring. There'll be an influx in the spring. They'll be here or not through the summer months. Again, they're not their host plant isn't here, so they have to go somewhere else to lay eggs, which is generally going to be west or south. And then in the fall, especially if there are rains in West Texas and South Texas, you'll get a big emergence of these guys and they will move into our area. They will even migrate as far north as Missouri and Kansas as well. A lot of these southern sulfurs. Uh, I believe I picked one of these up in at Burr Oak Woods in Kansas City, Blue Springs, Missouri, years and years ago. It was my first one ever. But they generally are only going to be here seasonally, and they are considered a tropical butterfly. Of all of these sulfurs, this is probably the most tropical of the bunch in terms of its distribution, normal distribution. But it has a real pale color, and I know when we're surveying, we notice this one because it has a lack of markings. You don't see black, big spotches of black. You don't see bold yellow much, except maybe at the base of the forewing, but that's very seldom can you actually see that. So this kind of pale green yellow is what gives this butterfly away. But again, in the fall, it can be in big numbers. In the spring, it can also be in smaller numbers, but it can be present. In the summertime in our area, it tends to disappear. All right. And here's its distribution. Again, you can see it's scattered from one end of the park to the other, but not a whole lot of records in our iNaturalist project for the park itself. Now, the most common sulfur that we have by number um, uh, in Guadalupe River State Park in our area is the orange sulfur, just plain orange sulfur. It can be variable. Here's a nice male, likely a male. Here's a female, has a white form. I mentioned earlier that some of these have a whitish form, so you can see a lot of white in this one. And then here's kind of an intermediate uh, color pattern. You can see on this particular one, it is this because it's backlit. You can see the orange up in here. Here you can see a little bit of it here. Here you're not seeing it at all because it's that pale form. These can be, even though it's called the orange sulfur, the amount of orange on this one is far less than the sleepy orange. Um, so keep that in mind. You can see the orange when the wings are flapping, but unless it's backlit like that up that top photograph, it can be a little challenging to see that orange color. So it's not great for identification. It does have black surrounding the edge of the forewing and the hind wing. You can see that even through this backlit here, but notice that there's patchy here, a patch of yellowish here, a patch of yellow in here. And that'll be significant here in just a moment when we compare it to the southern dog face. It does have that eye spot right there. It has that eye spot right there. Um, you almost make out if you really, maybe if you were like, had a couple too many beers, maybe you could see a pattern in here, a face pattern, silhouette. But generally, this and this mark are not that helpful on identification of this guy. But it's very common in the spring, a resurgent in the fall, late fall into the winter, and then they go crazy in the springtime, like I mentioned. Here's the distribution. It's found all over the park. And there are some surveys where they exceed. There could be 200 or 300 of these butterflies on one survey, and that's usually the best estimate we can make because every time we turn around, there's another 5 or 10 of them. So they really can be quite abundant in our area. And here's the southern dogface. This one looks a little similar to the last one we just looked at. However, one of the things, there's a couple of characteristics this one has. It's a little bit bigger. It's got up to about a 2.5 inch wingspan. Um, it has a lot more distinct dark when it's flying. It's very boldly black on this, especially on the forewing. It has a lot of times, especially when it's fresh, has that pink edging right in here especially on the forewing. You can see it here on this particular one. You can also see it even on the couple of the veins of the hind wing. This is a particularly fresh, even has pink up here. There is a pink-sided sulfur, but we don't have them in our area. So um, the other thing that gives its name Southern Dogface is because of this pattern right here. This is a male. If you imagine this being an eye spot, this being the ear, this black being an ear, and this is the silhouette of a dog. You can see the forehead comes, or the head comes down here. Here's the forehead. There's the eye. Here's the nose. There's the mouth and the jaw. So it's the silhouette always looks like a poodle to me. So that's a distinctive pattern that makes this a male. This one, the female, doesn't have as distinct a pattern. It's more washed out and thus a little bit less likely to be said, oh, that looks like a dog. I guess maybe if it's a pug or something, who knows? But this one is we never count lots of numbers of this. It's usually around, usually in small numbers. Um, and for what reason, I don't know. It is a southern butterfly. This is another one that immigrates north from Texas. And again, it can be distributed. It is distributed throughout the park over the course of time. So, a beautiful butterfly, one of my favorites. Um, it is until you get to the big cloudless and the large orange. This is the biggie of the sulfur so far. Here's a comparison between the southern dogface female and the orange sulfur. And again, both of these are backlit. You can see they both have this black spot. They both have this pattern right here. But again, notice the little bit of a falcate or pointed tip to the forewing. Notice the orange edging. This one has a little bit of orange edging here, or pink edging. Pardon me, pink edging, but not a lot. And then you notice this is all mostly solid black in here. There's a hint of yellow there, but again, more yellow here, more yellow here. This is a bigger butterfly if you saw them side by side. But again, that falcate or tip, pointed tip to the hind wing or the forewing can really help you distinguish between the two. Whereas this one is much more rounded, is it's obvious to tell right there. And these are a bit smaller. Okay, then we move on to the biggies, the big guys. We're getting close to the end here. Um, this is the cloudless sulfur of the two, cloudless and large orange. This is probably going to be the most common, although its distribution at our park is very uncommon. We don't see a lot of these, or we don't photograph a lot of these because they're big, strong, flying sulfurs. Kind of like the dog face, but these guys take it to the extreme. They remind me a lot of swallowtails. They're high flyers, they're strong flyers. You can watch one go by and there'll be flowers all over the place and it just keeps going. They do tend to like red flowers. So Turk's cap is a favorite of them. Some of the penstemons, some of the sages are also favorites of theirs. The host plant is senna, so they will breed in our area. But in the springtime, it seems like it takes a while for these to start showing up. If I start seeing lysides in the spring, I will start looking for cloudless sulfurs because sometimes they're traveling together. In the fall, if they get the rains out west again, these guys will often travel in large number with the lysides and then add in the American snout, which, as you all know, most of you probably know, comes in sometimes by the billions of them through the hill country when there's rain out in West Texas. So the way you tell this guy, the easiest way to tell this butterfly from the large orange, any of the other sulfurs is it's big and yellow. Um, but when you look at it, when the wings are folded and it's vectoring, there's a little series of lines or commas right here, but they're not in a straight line. You can really see it on this one the best. Kind of wavy lined all the way up and down through the forewing, and it continues into the hind wing. And on this one, which by the male it tends to be a lot paler, the female has more markings. This one is really hard to see because they're very faint. So sometimes the cloudless sulfur lives up to its name where it's literally cloudless. There's almost no markings at all that can be seen. So, but this is a butterfly again that will primarily be in the fall, occasionally a few in the spring. On rare occasion by August, you might see a few drifting around, but never super abundant in the immediate area, at least when we're doing our surveys. And then here's the large orange sulfur. And we're going to compare these two in the next slide. This is one that can be really common if you go down to the valley. They're everywhere and I mean, literally everywhere. Lots and lots of them. They too like red flowers of a variety, a large variety. Here's the way you tell this one. This one's got a lot more spot patterning. And notice that the male has a very pale form. Female is here. Female is here. Most likely this is a female. This is definitely a female. Um, the notice the variation. But here's the one consistent mark about the large orange. This line is straight. These dark markings have a straight long bar. You can see it in this pale one going through here. You can see it on this one right here. So that line of dark spots forms a distinct line. You can't mistake on these particular guys. Notice their host plants are Texas ebony, feather tree, and others. They generally don't breed in our area. They're more of a have a western and southern distribution. But again, this is one that is a big time migrant in the fall, especially, and that's when our numbers of these pick up over time. But again, strong flying, hard to photograph unless you got lots of red flowers and a lot of patience because they will just buzz you all constantly. By the way, here's a female. Here's a white form of the female right here. Again, straight line. You'll notice that straight line. That's the easiest way to tell this from the cloudless. But here are the two side by side. Here's that cloudless right here. Again, a wavy line going zigzagging all the way through the outside of both wings. And here's that more straight line going all the way through here, especially on the forewing is where you're really looking. Again, it helps when the wings are folded, and most of the time, again, sulfurs fold their wings, so that's good. Um, so now the other butterfly that is big and yellow that I keep waiting to see at Guadalupe River State Park, and I have to give Val credit. I looked for records in iNaturalist, and there is one record that did get somebody said it was. However, as I learned in the valley this summer, this late fall into winter, the overlap of the outside of the wings between large orange sulfurs and the orange barred sulfur is so strong unless you can see this orange patch here, and this orange on, and this is in flight, so it's a really blurry picture. This is on the dorsal surface of the top of the wings. It trying to identify an orange barred from this view or this view is virtually impossible. And I've tried and tried and tried all winter to record an orange barred with its wings folded. And every time it flew, it lacked these orange patterns. And that's the orange barred. So, not saying it wasn't, Valerie, because it wasn't there, but seeing it with the wings open is the best way to know that you're seeing an orange barred. The only one I really saw well was in the Houston area years and years ago. They are in the valley, but again, I constantly missed. That was one of the butterflies I missed all fall down there in my visits. So again, these are the largest of the butterflies. There's a lot of information on sulfurs. Hopefully, I haven't put people to sleep. Um, uh, Now, let me show you one other thing. This is just 2025 results of 2025 surveys. These are the different species that are color coded here. A couple of things to really point out. The orange sulfurs, again, I mentioned that they are the most common butterfly we have at the park. Here's January, here's February, March, and April. And the only reason March is low is because we couldn't get the second survey that month, but they really peaked in February when it still can be pretty chilly. And then you can see they kind of drop off the map all the way until there's a little bit of resurgence. Well, actually, no, there's not. Here's where they resurge again a little bit. They come back in November and again, a few of them in December. And then they really go nuts right here this time of the year. And then in terms of other species, the sleepy orange, this green bar right here, you can see that it kind of is there, kind of drops out here for a little bit, and then it picks back up here, picks up again in the fall. The dainty sulfur is blue. Again, the springtime seems to be up until about June, seems to be a good time to get them. And then the blue starts to pick up and really picks up in November where we get much better numbers. Little yellow is in purple, and it just barely shows up here. There's a little bit of there. It has I'm still trying to figure out the distribution time of year for the little yellow. It's a challenging one to sort through. The southern dogface and the cloudless and the checkered white, we just don't get enough records to really show much of a distribution pattern. But again, springtime is the big time for a lot of our sulfurs, and then a little bit of a resurgence in the fall, and they drop off during the summer months.
Yeah. Hey, Craig. Darlene's got
Yes,
a question.
yeah,
In the picture of the cloudless, she always sees the two large dots, unlike the large orange. Is that anything that you can count on?
I would say not definitively. I would not. Let's put it this way. Let me go back. So here's the large orange. Look at the big white spots here. And then if that wasn't hidden, there's two big white spots here. So and here's two white spots here. If you look in the field guides, I don't use that as a characteristic to separate these two. It's too variable. But again, if you looked at this one, it has almost no big spots. It's still there, but very variable. So I would not use that as a characteristic because I mean, let's face it, those spots are appear on the dog face, on the orange sulfur, and on these two guys, and the orange barred. And it's too variable to be dependent on. That's why I want to point out that again, use those markings out here on both of these butterflies to actually distinguish between the two. Okay. It's a good question, and I've looked at that 100 times over the years, and I've just come to the conclusion that that is not. a characteristic I'm going to rely on when I have a much better field mark to use for that. Hopefully that answers that question. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up here? Next month, we'll be talking about some other butterflies, but we'll start off with a little quiz. So I'm going to encourage everybody to look over your sulfurs or review this before you come for the quiz and see how you do. Um, so a couple of reminders and upcoming events are butterfly surveys for this month at Guadalupe River State Park. On Friday, February 6th at 1 p.m., we meet at the overflow parking lot just inside the entrance. If you're coming for the first time or the first time in a long time, just tell them that you're there for the butterfly survey at the front gate. They pass you through. And then the second one for February is Saturday, February 21st, again at 1 p.m. We try to take advantage of the warmest time of the day, and this time will shift to mornings once we get into April and through the summer months. Next thing to keep in mind, the next refresher training will be Monday, March 2nd, 7 p.m. We're going to be looking at crescents, blues, and hair streaks. Fun times with those babies. And then each training is being recorded. The links are typically sent out about by the end of the week of the training date and shared out. So you'll have those. Again, thanks to Robert and Jeanette for that. In the LMO area master naturalist, again, Robert was the one that went to Jeanette and said, "Hey, can we get these recorded so we don't have to stick to 40 minutes because I can't talk about anything in under 40 minutes." So as I've proven once again tonight. Um, anyway, so those are some upcoming things. My email, um, Ollie. Let's see here. Let me see if I can. Let me get out of this. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and let me go to the chat. I'm going to go ahead and put my email in here in case you are interested in joining our surveys. And there's Darlene's put hers in there as well. Anyway, I hope that that is helpful to everybody. Just like with bird watching, butterfly watching is a lot of fun, but it also takes effort, takes practice. Um, and the good news is we have a lot of good people who have a variety of skills. Some of us are really good at spotting the butterflies. Others are super good at identifying them. And we always bring cameras if you have a camera to take pictures. That helps with some of the IDs in the field while we're out there. Bring a field guide if you have one. There's the little flip guides for the whole country. There's also the Kaufman guide. This is the one that I use all the time. As you can kind of tell, it's pretty beat up. The other good field guide is Glassberg's Swift Guide to the Butterflies. I use this more as a reference back at home. And so those are two really good guides to use. Um, anyway, that's all I have, Robert. So unless there's another question, I am happy to say good night. And I hope this was helpful for you all.
Yeah, just lots of positive feedback, Craig, as always, with your presentations, always content rich. So, um, yeah, no other questions in here. I'll go ahead.
Cool.